Hey friends, what's up? It's C, and today I've got a really cool, fun little tale for you. It's a tale of two factories. I'm going to talk to you about these two factories that exist within inside of you and the problems associated with them when we don't use them the way that they're intended. So let's start with the one that we all use most commonly in Western modern society all the time. It's our factory that is run on carbohydrates. It's run on sugars, basically. So you've got this sugar factory, right? Sounds really cool, doesn't it? A sugar factory. I want to go to the sugar factory. Who doesn't want to go to the damn sugar factory? But the fact of the matter is, right, this is the only factory that most people in modern Western society are relying upon to produce energy for themselves. Starts to cause problems. See, one of the things that happens when you use something over and over again all the time without letting it rest, without putting it aside, without without mixing it up and using something else. Think of like like a t-shirt. You go and buy a t-shirt, right? It's your favorite t-shirt, so you wear it every day. I don't wear t-shirts, obviously, but you wear a t-shirt and you wear the same shirt every single day. You wear it for like 5 days in a row, and then it gets stinky, so you put it in the wash. And you're probably judging me at this point, like you wear a shirt for 5 days in a row before washing it. All right, so let's say you wash it every day. At the end of the day, it's going to start getting pretty stretched out, pretty fucking gnarly, threadbare. It's going to blow through in spots. It's probably going to rip in spots, and the shirt's not going to be so good anymore, right? You definitely couldn't wear it to your favorite restaurant, unless your favorite restaurant's McDonald's, and then we're having a problem. So, the fact of the matter is, it's the same thing inside your body. Your carbohydrate factory, like your sugar factory, this factory that produces energy for you from you eating sugars. Now, not just sugar, right? It's carbohydrates. It's anything. Even fruit is full of sugar. Anything at all that is reliant upon carbohydrates that you eat breaks down to those simple sugars. Some of them break down faster or slower, but that one factory is responsible for that, right? You're using that one factory every single day. What happens to that factory? Same thing that happens to the t-shirt, right? It starts to get a little bit threadbare. The machinery in the factory starts to get tired. Like one of one of the main, I guess, things when it comes to the sugar factory in your body is the production of insulin, like your insulin spike. When you eat sugar, your body releases insulin, or you get this insulin spike. The insulin comes out. It's like these little dump trucks that come out, and when the sugar's in your blood, they drive into the bloodstream, and they're like, hey, cool, jump in. And then they load their dump trucks with the sugar, and then they drive it into the cells where it's, used in this factory to produce energy for you. That's what insulin does. If you eat simple sugars, that happens really fast, and the drivers get strung out. That's why you get that spike in energy. They're driving really fast. They load it in. They drive it really fast into the cells. You get that spike in energy, but then what happens off the back of that is you slump. You run out of energy because the drivers, the little trucks, insulin is tired. Like it spiked too fast and it comes off too fast, right? So that's one of the problems associated with it. Now, if you do that over and over and over and over and over again, what eventually happens is the trucks don't have the ability to go out the way they normally would. And that's where you start getting things like acquired diabetes, right? You become pre-diabetic or you become diabetic. Effectively, the factory is not working the way that it's meant to. It can't send the truck drivers out. Sugar's just running rampant around your body doing its thing. It can't go where it needs to go. It's a little bit lost. It's like a tourist without a map, right? It's in your body. It's like, where am I supposed to go? I thought a truck was going to meet me and take me to where I was meant to go. Doesn't really work because the factory isn't working the way it's meant to. It's like that old t-shirt, it's threadbare, it's ripped, it's got holes in it. So, having said all that, your body was designed very powerfully. You actually have two factories. You've got another one. What does your other factory run on? If the first factory runs on sugar, it's a sugar factory, the other factory runs on fat. It's your fat factory. One second. Your fat factory. Now, what would happen if you had a factory that you built and you had it all set up, it was all ready to go, and you never actually turned the machines on? Or you might have turned them on to test it. Maybe once every like 12 months, you turn a machine on. Yep, still works. Turn it off and leave it, and you just let it sit there. You close the doors and you go back to your other factory. I'm going to go back to my sugar factory. It's the one that I trust. It's reliable. It's working for me. It's fun. I like my sugar factory. This factory doesn't really work for me, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it alone. What would happen in that case? Right? So think about it in terms of factories. You have this second factory that's sitting there. It's now a nesting ground for critters that want to hide in there, and there's all kinds of things that aren't working the way that they're meant to in there because they're seized. Like they've started to corrode from not being used. They're not being maintained. They're not being looked after. So that factory is like it's basically stalled. It's even if you were to put fat in, that factory doesn't effectively fire up because you are literally trying to jumpstart a system that very, very rarely gets used, and it's sluggish. Now, for those of you that have made the transition into keto, you're on the keto diet, you've gone into ketosis, right? You may have recognized there was a period for about a week where when you went into ketosis, what actually happened was you started to feel very flu-like. It's a term known as keto flu. Now that keto flu feels all kinds of horrible in your body. What's actually happening is you've got these workers in the sugar factory that are like, well, hang on, we're not producing anything. There's no work coming through. So they're shutting down the sugar factory and there's no work going through there. So they're racing down the street to get to the fat factory. And when they get down there, they're fumbling with the machinery. They're like, we've never used this before. We don't know how to turn it on. And it takes them a minute to get familiar with it and, get it all fired up and working properly and blow the cobwebs off and shoo the possums out that have been, nesting in there, and the raccoons, trash pandas, and all that kind of thing, right? So that is why that period for about a week where you had keto flu, your body wasn't getting what it needed. It wasn't getting the energy it needed from the sugar factory, which was, being wound down. There was nothing going through it. And the fat factory wasn't working at the level it needed to because it had not been run for so long. And so you go through that transitionary period. Now, here's where the human body gets really, really powerful. You look outside, right? Right now, we're on the tail end of summer. We're coming into fall. We're coming into autumn, right? So the weather is starting to, don't get me wrong, I'm in Florida, so don't get crazy here, but it's starting to get a little bit cool, a little tiny bit. You can feel the shift, very, very subtle, right? Up in the north, they're already talking about winter is coming, right? But we're starting to notice that there is less heat and less humidity here, right? So what happens as you move into winter? If you were living up north, if you were living like somewhere where it gets really cold, the ground gets covered in snow and ice, what happens during that time? Now, before you answer that question, I want you to think about it in terms like a little bit differently. I want you to think about it as if you didn't have access to a grocery store down the street. You didn't have a bank account. You didn't have an Amazon account. You were living in a hut in the woods. Dare I say, the way we were intended to live, right? You were living in alignment with the natural world. What happens come winter time to all of those things that you very possibly have been feeding your sugar factory all summer long because they've been growing, they've been bountiful, you've had this giant cornucopia of fruits and vegetables and produce that just grows. What happens come winter time if you live in a place where the ground freezes? It all goes away. So what are you going to have to eat? What are you relying upon at that point, right? Because that factory now at the end of summer, there's nothing to feed it. There's nothing to take into that factory. So you've either stockpiled, but fruit and vegetables don't last. Like even you freeze them, it doesn't work, right? So something else needs to happen at that point. This is where it gets really, really interesting. At that point, the only thing available to us is the things that are still flying, crawling, or walking around on the frozen ground. Our animal brothers and sisters, right? And this is the way that the human body was originally meant to operate. So you go into a point where you're now eating fats and proteins. Now, a couple of things happens when that fat factory comes online. For starters, it's now burning so much hotter. It's like big, heavy logs on the fire as opposed to little sticks. Your carbohydrates, your sugars, that's like putting little sticks on the fire. It's cool, gone, gone. You put a big, heavy log on the fire, that's your fats, right? Your fat factory is designed to produce a lot more energy than what your sugar factory does, right? So what happens at that point? You generally stay inside when it's freezing cold. You're in your cabin. If you need to, you go out, you find something, you like an animal you hunt, you kill, you process, you bring it back, and then you've got that. Maybe you've got a week's worth of food there. You're sitting around, you're not doing a whole lot. You don't have to be super active when your fat factory is working. And the reason being is because that fat is burning so hot inside of your body that it's taking care of itself. Like it's literally, you don't have to go out and exercise to remain trim, taut, and terrific when you're relying on that fat factory. That's why ketosis, the keto diet, works for weight loss, right? It's not ideal to stay on it forever because you're not meant to run one factory all the time. It wears out. But that's why. You're sitting around, you're in your cabin, it's freezing outside, you got your fire going, you got your pipe, you got your brandy, and you're just, life is good. You got a big belly full of fats and proteins from the animal that you killed yesterday, and you've got another week's worth before you have to go out again. You don't have to move too much, but your body is taking care of itself. And then something happens. The snow starts to melt. We come back to a point where it's now springtime. There's the thaw. Everything, like all the produce is starting to come back. The vegetables are growing. The fruits are growing. The plant matter's coming back. Now we get to shut down the fat factory. We get to stop hunting, and we get to go, or we can still do that, but we get to go and turn the sugar factory back on because those starches, the carbohydrates, they are all now available to us again. This is the healthiest way for us to live. Now, I live in Florida where the ground never gets covered in snow and ice. It doesn't super matter. It's still important to allow your body to cycle through its two factories. That's where optimum health comes from. And that's where things like total wellness, vitality, youthfulness, and longevity come from. It comes from being able to recognize, okay, this is what the earth is currently doing. I'm a part of that earth. I could remove myself in a false ecosystem. I could put myself into a climate controlled environment and never pay attention to what's happening out there. But that's where disease comes from. It's disconnection. So we go back, we remain connected to what's happening out there. We pay attention. It's starting to get cold. Okay, now might be the time for me to focus on shifting my food source to something that is a little bit more fat factory focused. Like, we don't have to talk in absolutes here. We're not children. It's not just black or white. I'm only eating fats during winter and I'm only eating oranges during summer. It doesn't work like that, right? Have a blend. Work both factories. But generally speaking, the body is designed so that you have the ability to cycle between these factories. And after you've gone through that initial period of adjustment where you've turned the fat factory on, you've gone into that whole, I feel like I'm going to die, and then a week later you feel good, you've got sustained energy, right? After that, once you've made the transition once, it's really easy. It just goes backwards and forwards. And that's where you get people like myself, fat adapted athletes. So when I go out for a run, I could literally go for my first 6 hours of an ultra marathon without taking any food because my body is fat adapted. Even if the last thing I ate was an orange, as soon as I go out, I start running, my body recognizes that the little guys in the sugar factory, they're working on their sugars and starches and carbs, and they eventually say, okay, we've got no more fuel to put in here. Let's duck down the street and turn on the fat factory. So they race down the street, boom, fire it up. All of a sudden, I'm burning body fat. and it happens that fast. Just some food for thought, friends. All these things are inside of us, they're inside of you. And that is where superior health, wellness, and vitality comes from. And that leads to perfect youthfulness and longevity. So have fun with it. If you've got any questions, ask, but have fun with it. Do your own research. Go out and discover this shit for yourself. You are your own science lab. Do experiments on yourself. You know, a lot of this stuff, yes, I learned in college, but book knowledge is useless without practical application. A lot of this stuff I learned in practice by experimenting on myself. And that's where we're at. So have fun with it. See you soon.